Welcome to the Catalina top sewing pattern video tutorial. Here is a list of the notions you need to get started, and let's jump right into it. Let's start out with this fold over version. I am going to be upcycling this pair of jeans, and I do want to note that my center back piece will be cut on the fold, although I'm going to be using this side seam here to cut my center back piece on the fold. So although you do see a seam line on my center back piece, I did not stitch it together, and if you do need to piece your center back together, please do add seam allowance to account for that. That's what's left of the jeans after I cut it out, and here are my pattern pieces. Step one on this version of the top is to finish the edge of all pattern pieces. So I used a serger to finish the edge of mine. You could opt for a zigzag stitch instead, or get very fancy and use some bias tape to bind the edges. The next step is to line up your front pieces. So you take the center front piece and the side front piece, place them right sides together, matching the notches in the bottom raw edge, and then up at the arm side you match that point from the side front piece to the point on the center front piece. Sewing this part gets a little tricky because from that notch to the arm side you need to ease the fabric in. The way I do that is by sewing from the bottom up to that notch, and then once I hit that notch I will hold the center front piece with a little bit more tension so that the fabric eases around and creates that nice rounded shape on the front of the bodice. The next step is to take your back pieces and do basically the same thing, although you do not need to ease much fabric in on this back side because you don't have as much shaping to do on your back side. So with right sides together, line up those notches and bottom edge, and then do note that there is a notch to line up your back side piece to your center back piece. Now we are going to line up our shoulder seams. So with right sides together, do make sure your center front is facing the center. Right sides together, line up those shoulder seams and sew them in place. With right sides still together, we are going to line up those side seams. Just match up the corner of the arm side and then the corner edge of the bottom. Now, I know I have skipped pressing each step, but so far that has not been detrimental. So I'm going to press all my seams open now, and wanted to show you this little trick I do if you don't have a pressing ham or lost yours like I did. Basically, I hold my seam open with my thumb, and with my fingers on the other side I sort of lift the fabric to create that rounded shape at the bust, just like you would get from a pressing ham, and it just helps the fabric lay nice and smooth around that curved area. The next step I take in this video is completely optional and actually not included in the instructions. It is very specific to the final look I want from this denim top. So basically I'm switching out my thread to this golden like heavyweight top stitching thread to get a more traditional look. I just top stitched either side of the seams that we made. This is certainly not necessary and just a little feature I wanted on my denim top. You can certainly skip this step entirely, and I do recommend it unless you want this same sort of look. Continuing right along, the next step is to press up all of these edges by 3/8 of an inch. This includes the bottom, center front, the front neckline, and the back neckline, as well as each of the armholes. Once you have completed that, it is time to make your ties, and that will be just stitching along the edge of your bias tape. I'm using something a little different. I don't know what to call it. I found it at an estate sale, but it's basically already sewn up into these ties here. To insert these straps into the top, I'm going to slide that raw end of the tie right up to the wrong side of the fold there. So you see that fold line is where I stuck that raw end of the tie. Just slide it all the way in and then fold it back over that raw edge, or serged edge, I suppose. And then we'll stitch it down once when we stitch down that folded edge, and again close to the edge of the fabric, of the main fabric. So again, just stick it right in there to that fold line, flip it back over, and that I think conceals that raw edge of the tie very nicely. And again, we'll stitch it down once when we stitch down that folded edge, and then again we'll go back and stitch just really close to the edge of the main fabric to give it extra security. And then I'm just lining it up so that the other side matches and doing the same thing. Just sew down all of those edges that we pressed over. For this denim top, I am just simply going to knot the other end of the ties. You can fold back this raw edge twice if you would like a more concealed sort of raw edge of your tie. But then that's it. This version is so fast. It's already done. Now on to the next version. Let's get started on the lined version of this top. This blue gingham fabric is going to be my lining fabric. And this blue and white floral fabric is going to be referred to as my main fabric. This version of the top is basically reversible. That's why I am using two beautiful fabrics, one for the lining, one for the main, but really it can be worn either side out. The beginning parts of constructing this top is very similar to the fold-over version, but you do everything twice. I'm going to start here by matching up my main fabric right sides together at the notch. I'm going to do that for both sides, the main fabric and the lining fabric. From there, I'm going to go straight down and match up the bottom edges, and then I'm going to take that corner of the side, the front side piece, and match it with the corner of the center front piece, because that notch above to the arm side is where you do the easing in of the fabric. That is the part that gets a little bit tricky, and like I mentioned as a little tip in the previous fold over tutorial, is that I like to sew straight up from the bottom to that notch, and then I will hold those two corners together, the corners right here of that side front and center front that match up in the arm side. I hold them together, which basically pulls that center front piece a little more taut, and that tension on that center front piece there will ease that fabric in beautifully and create a nice smooth curved edge that shapes your body perfectly. Like I also mentioned in the fold-over version, it is important to go slow during that part from the notch to the arm side. Now you can sew from the bottom up on all four pieces to complete your front, top, main fabric, and lining fabric. The next step we take is very similar, but a bit easier. We are going to take your center back pieces and your side back pieces and lay them right sides together, matching the notches and the bottom edge of the fabric, as well as lining up the top of your side back piece to the notch on your center back piece. Do this for both sides of your main fabric as well as both sides of your lining fabric, and sew from the bottom edge up to the top of your side back piece. Next, we are going to sew the shoulder seams. Let's start with the main fabric and match up the back shoulder seams to the front shoulder seams, making sure that your center front of the top is in the center when you do this. The arm side and the center of this front top can look sort of similar. It gets a little tricky, so just please make sure your center front is in the center when you do this. And of course, repeat for the lining. Right sides together, match up your front shoulder seams with your back shoulder seams and sew them together. And of course, I did not press after each step, so now I'm going to press all of my seams open, and I'm going to give the same tip as I did in the fold-over version, and that is if you do not have a pressing ham or lost yours, you can hold your seam open with your thumb like I'm doing here and place your fingers on the other side of the top and sort of lift the top as you press around that curved edge. This sort of gives the shape that you're going for with these princess seams. So just press all your seams open, do the best you can if you don't have a pressing hand, but I really do like to lift to create that curve as you press. Now we are going to sew this neckline. I'm going to start by placing my main fabric right side up, and then I'll take my lining fabric and place it right side down so that the right side of these fabrics are together. Then I will start lining up these shoulder seams. Then I will line up the center front edge add a few pins in between or clips in between, and then I will also line up the center back line, and again add a few clips in between to make sure everything stays in place nice and neat. Then we're going to take that to the sewing machine and sew from the center front of the neckline, not the center front line, but the center front of the neckline around to the other side of the center front. Again, you're sewing the neckline only, not down the center front. Then we are going to flip the top in from the neckline. So you can see here I am now placing wrong sides together by folding my fabric through the neckline. And then we are going to press that neckline edge, doing the best that you can to line it up in a way that you cannot see the inside fabric from the outside. Now we are going to tackle my favorite part, and that is, yes, the arm size. We are going to use the burrito method to accomplish this, and I promise it's not as scary as it sounds. So as you can see, we have wrong sides together, and I am going to grab both the lining and the main fabric from one side of the top and start rolling it up. I'm going to roll it all the way until we get to that other side of the top where the strap sort of is. And then I am going to take my main fabric, only the main fabric, do not grab the lining, take the main fabric and wrap it around the side of the top that we just rolled up, all the way around and under until that main fabric right side reaches that lining fabric right side. And you are going to match up the shoulder seams right there. And you're going to do the same thing with that underarm area. I'm going to pick up just that main fabric, wrap it around that area we rolled up, and match the right side of my main fabric to the right side of my lining fabric. You want to make sure that along this armhole edge, that rolled up area is not creeping close to your seam allowance because you do not want it to get caught in your seam. I'm going to match up my back seam line here to make sure everything's lining up perfectly. And again, making sure that other side of the top that we rolled up is not getting into my seam allowance. I'm going to clip that in place, and then I'm going to go to the other underarm area. I'm going to roll up my other side of my top again and take just that main fabric and wrap it around and underneath so that it meets with the right side of my lining fabric. And I'm going to clip those corners right there and then do the same thing with my front princess seam. I'm going to match up my main fabric to my lining fabric at that princess seam. These straps are quite thin, so please double check to make sure that that wrapped up area is not creeping into your seam allowance. It gets a little tricky when you are right in that strap area, but you can do it. I believe in you. And then we're going to take it to the sewing machine and sew only along that armhole edge, not down the side seams. Then we are going to take it from the front and start pulling that top side that we wrapped up, pulling it through the strap and out of the front. This part takes a little finagling and finessing, but you can do it. And honestly, this finish on the armhole is far superior. So it is totally worth it in my opinion. Now you can unroll the other side of the top, lay it out just as we started in this burrito method, but this time we are going to roll up that already sewn armhole side. We are going to roll it up to the same spot until we meet that strap, roll it up, and then we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to take the right side of our main fabric, take it around that rolled up side and underneath to meet with the right side of our lining fabric. Next, I'm going to do the same exact thing at the shoulder seam. I am going to take my main fabric right side and wrap it around my rolled up area. You can see my rolled up area is in between, and I am wrapping my armhole edges around it, lining up that shoulder seam and making sure the right side of my main fabric is matched with the right side of my lining fabric. And again, you're going to match up those princess seams in the front and the back, and make sure that your burrito wrapped up roll is not close to your seam allowance. And we are going to sew along that armhole edge. Again, do not sew down the side seam, just the armhole edge. And then flip it right sides out, pulling that rolled up area through the front. It should be looking like this now, and then we are going to take this to our iron and press it similarly so that when you are wearing the top, you cannot see the inside fabric from the outside. Whichever side you choose to wear as the inside or the outside, you're not seeing the inside from the outside. Now we are going to sew the side seams. So I am going to fold my main fabric forward so that my main fabric front and back sides are right side together. And I'm going to pin that along that edge, and I want to match up that seam where my main fabric switches to my lining fabric. Match that up and then pin your lining fabric front and back along the side seams. And here we are showing the other side. You're going to flip your main fabric over and onto your main fabric, front and back, lined up together at the side seams, and then again line up the area where your main fabric transitions to your lining fabric, and then line up your lining fabric right sides together, the front to the back at the side seam. And we are going to sew along this edge from the bottom of the main fabric along the edge and across that junction where main fabric changes to lining fabric, and all the way down your lining fabric to the bottom. I feel like the top looks kind of funky when we sew the side seams, but trust the process. So what your next step should be is to press those side seams open. Now I clearly forgot that step when filming the tutorial, and I am just flipping my top right side out, so wrong sides together, and I forgot to press those side seams open and flat. My mistake. Don't make my mistake. Do as I say, not as I do. So here I am using bias tape to make my ties. I am using double fold bias tape, and I am going to sew along this edge so that it encloses those raw edges and does not fray. The next thing I am going to do is to cut this long strip into 4 equal pieces, and I'm going to do that by lining up the raw ends, tracing them all the way along to the opposite side, and cutting right here at that bend, which should be that center point. And I'm going to do that once more so that I can make 4 equal pieces for the tie. Then I am going to flip the top so that right sides are together, and I will be placing the straps in between the right side of the main fabric and the right side of the lining fabric along that center front edge. Just simply sandwich the tie right in between there, and make sure that you straighten the tie out so that it does not sneak into your seam allowance anywhere else, because when we sew this in, we are going to sew the front closed and then most of the bottom of the top closed. And you don't want that tie to sneak into that seam allowance and then get stuck somewhere it should not be stuck. I'm mentioning this because of course I have done that before, and you just simply need to seam rip it and start all over again. But let's not do that. We can avoid it by just making sure that strap is straight out of the way. Once the ties are in place, we're going to pin the rest of the way down the front and along that bottom edge. And I like to match up those princess seams to make sure everything is nice and even. And then when we sew this together, we are going to leave about a 2-inch gap at the bottom center back. And that is just so that we can reach our little fingers in there and pull the top right side out again. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's make sure to clip those corners. So here I am pulling the top right side out, and then what I think is a very important thing to do next is to use a point turner and make sure you get those corners point it out. Get the corner nice and 90 degrees using a point turner or chopsticks, something pointy to help shape those corners. Then that 2-inch center back piece, we need to fold in that seam allowance and then press along all of the edges, again with the same idea in mind that when you are wearing the top, you do not see whatever fabric is on the inside from the outside. The next step is going to be to top stitch around all of the edges, and that top stitching is what is going to close up that bottom center back area that we left open to be able to flip the top. What I like to do is sew from the back neckline all the way around, so you start and end at the back neckline, and then for the armholes I like to start at the underarm side seam. It's a pretty hidden spot to disguise your back stitching. And lastly would be to close up the ends of your ties. I simply just like to tie a knot at the end of mine, but you can have a little more professional of a finish by folding that raw edge of the tie twice and stitching it down. And there you have it. Here is my main fabric side and the lining side, which I would like to say is just as good as the main fabric side. Thank you for joining me on this Catalina top sew along, and I can't wait to see your makes. Please tag me and use the hashtag so we can all see what you made.